it a long time ago, but I would have called it successful as I'm watching the phase. You never got out of the phase of you needed to be prompted to use it.
So what I would say to that is go back to phase one, because somehow there was some step that was missed. Collect your data, and if they do have most of the steps, if they're almost at phase 3, if you go back and you retrain, you reteach from phase 1, it's going to fill in those gaps, and then you're going to move through the system probably pretty quickly.
We had like a big book, you knew where all of it was, just like the other one you were describing, except you just never did any spontaneous language. So
see, and that would go.
His A was really good at recognizing he was getting agitated, and then he would prompt him to use the book. You know what I mean? Like, what are you wanting, or what are you, and he was, you know, they had a great, but I don't remember.
Go back to phase 1, because that's exactly where.
Right. And likely, and I see that a lot. I see
very successful, because you knew he can discriminate between, it's just the initiation part.
That's where that distance training probably never occurred. That's what happens when you don't do good distance training and do it systematically, where you are planning your prompt phase and you are planning, I'm going to face you
when you're
and then I'm going to turn.
persistence.
If you do not do that, you'll have those holes. And those holes almost always lead to prompt dependency.
And I mean, where she's turned around and she doesn't pay any attention to me. If I'm sitting here poking her with that, is that an appropriate way to gain her attention? No.
Especially not if you poke me there.
But that's what they do. That's the level where they're poking you.
Right. Yeah.
But you go back to that phase 2, and that's where you might have to, you know, do a prompt, do a gesture of putting your open hand here to facilitate them coming around, because you want them to gain that attention. So you have to go back to that first step. And once you go back and you reteach those skills, they're going to be beyond phase 3 in a minute, because you filled in that gap that they were missing.
So that whole Swiss cheese foundation that they had, then when they go back through that training, and they'll move quick.
Those holes are going to be filled.
They're able to tell this to this. They're going to fill in those holes. But it all comes from that real fidelity of intervention delivery, where you're not just going to give in because, hey, they're communicating with me, it's awesome, I'm going to give them this. No, make them work for it.
And that's
make them do it correctly.
Where I think we set the difference between, is it a true formal PECS program, or are we just using icons, a visual communication system? So
that's absolutely right.
There's nothing wrong with just using icons. If that's how you're going to start to initiate, we do it in our house. I mean, we've got labels on our cupboards. We've got labels on our fridge. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how we're starting to teach some of those first communication skills. It works a whole lot more than I have no idea what that means. I know what this means, so I can teach this. And so there's nothing wrong with starting with just using icons. But just do know that that's very different than using PECS as a formal communication system. And you can get there. But it's important to have a formal communication system.
Good?
Or we're going to see a lot of behavior.
Yeah, because
lots of behavior.
Behavior is communication. You guys know that. You're living it every day. We talked briefly about this one when we introduced it, response, interruption, and redirection. This is when you know what's coming, right? And you want to stop that behavioral chain. That's basically what's happening with this one. It is the introduction of a prompt, a comment, a distraction, something to interfere or divert the learner's attention away from an interfering behavior.
And you guys do this every single day.
You do it
multiple
constantly.
Times throughout your hours in the classrooms.
And with your own children. Everybody does this, right? They're really, really useful to do this if you have repetitive behaviors, and a lot of stimming behaviors, that's great. Stereotypic behaviors, and especially with self-injurious behaviors. Questions on that one? That one's a pretty...
How many of you guys have worked with individuals that have some pretty intense self-injurious behavior? Yeah.
You got to stop that, right? So that's where redirection and interruption, distraction. I mean, you all did it if you've ever had children and you had a toddler and they're crying and all of a sudden this the coolest toy in the world just appeared in the next room.
I have a headbanger.
That is what that is, right? It's absolutely what that is.
Takes you back to 15-month-old behavior when they don't have the words to express what they want, but they sure can show you.
Oh, can't they? So that one's pretty simple.
Scripting.
Scripting. Has everybody seen a script? Okay, everybody's scripting?
It is an evidence-based practice now. I mean, there's really no wrong scripts. One of the recommendations is that we always want to make sure that we are introducing the appropriate behavior that we want to. You have the student use, the language. It goes back to very similar parts of social stories or social narratives, if we don't want to
Right. It's
trademark Carol Gray's social stories.
social stories, trademark.
Yeah, TM. But we want to use that same positive, proactive language from the student's perspective, so it gives them the words. And what that does is then they're able to get that script, because we know a lot of our kids like to script. It's calming to them. So if we can give them the words, if we can give them the script, and then it just kind of gets ingrained in some of that language. It becomes very functional for them. It can be a handwritten script. It can be comic strip conversation where we're using some icons and drawings. But what it does is it just overviews what you want the student to do in a certain situation. Structured play. Okay, so we talked about, go ahead.
Hold on, Sherry.
So is social narrative a separate?
Yes, it's a separate evidence-based practice. Because social stories are trademarked by Carol Gray. It is a packaged curriculum that you could purchase. So the generic term for that is social narratives. And so a social story is a social narrative. So everybody familiar with social stories and social narratives are overviews, the expectations of...
What's the difference between that and a script?
A script, so a social narrative is a story. It's a little bit longer of a paragraph, where a script would just be a couple of phrases. Kind of like like on a power card, there are those like control sentences at the end. Those would be used as scripts. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Just short little sentences.
I'm going with her on this one.
I use the picture pack, those pictures for scripts and things like that with some of my.
Your board maker
I'm
icons?
a social worker, so I'm trying to help with specific behaviors.
Absolutely.
Deaf kids don't have the language, so you can't even do a social story because they can't read it.
So you just use...
I use the pictures and I have the text.
And a lot of the social stories that I write are very much adapted, where there's only a few words on a page, lots of pictures. Then again, if it's for a high school student that has the literacy skills, it might be a page-long piece of paper, and that's when you have to get creative, because oftentimes they know when you bring that story, they're going to toss it. So my newest favorite thing is I'll take it to them and I'll say, can you edit this for me? Still gets in. They have to read it. Got to be creative about your presentation.
Another thing that I've been doing recently with a lot of my junior high and high school students who are using social narratives is bringing in the technology piece. So doing it in like a PowerPoint or something like that, and doing it on the iPad or a laptop or a computer. And I've had several students who were really resistant to the idea of a social narrative at first, and then once we put it onto the computer, it was a whole different realm. So just something to think about. I think a lot of the junior high and high school teachers get resistant to that because they think, oh, it's this baby story. Our kids with their language level need so many of those pictures that it's hard to find age-appropriate pictures. So when we can shift it to like a video or a PowerPoint or something like that.
I was going to say that
really
ties so well to video modeling. Because
Absolutely.
when they like that technology, you could either do script with an iPad or iPod.
Which you don't need a
whatever.
fancy smancy app for it. This is notes, and the first one I have in here are the iPad rules. 1, you may use the iPad at school this week only. This is during my summer trainings. Number 2, the iPad stays at school at the end of the day. Number 3, be careful, keep it with you. 4, if you're going outside or to the gym, give it to an adult. 5, games are for rec time only. Number 6, Nikki or another adult can use the iPad at any time. And so those are all different rules, but they also become scripts as a student, because this might be a student who typically uses an iPad in a different way. But if it's going to be used for a support or for a strategy, they need to know what the rules are, that it's not just for games, that there's certain rules that go along with this. And so as they keep reading this, those are scripts that are committed to memory, and it helps them learn that new skill, how we're going to use it.
Excellent.
Structured playgroups.
How many of you are doing early intervention? A few of you? Okay. Every time I think early intervention, I think structured playgroup. Because it tends to go pretty hand in hand with younger kids, right? This also can go all the way up. When I taught in Cincinnati at the autism clinic, one of the biggest complaints that we had was programming ended when they were 14. Right? Do you guys see that same thing? There's lots of supports in place for young kids. And then when they become teenagers and behavior could really get them in trouble, supports stop and resources are no longer there. So we actually put together we didn't call it this, but it was a structured play group where we gathered kids together, non-autistic with autism, verbal, nonverbal, all of it all together, deaf with autism, everybody together, and we learned how to play games together because like you were saying, your brain centers activate differently in play than in work. And we have to teach our kids to play.
So if we take a look at the autism literature going back about 20, 25 years, there was a big push for discrete trial, working one-on-one with a student at a table teaching certain skills. And then as we learned more and we got more research around the field of discrete trial instruction and systematic instruction, we found out that a lot of those table skills weren't being generalized. And then as we learned more, we found out that some of those skills that were being taught here weren't necessarily the foundation skills that our kiddos need. And that's where the whole concept of play came from. And play is a pivotal skill. It's a skill that every single person needs to learn. And we don't think about play as being a skill that we have to break down and teach. So we actually have to get down on the ground and break a skill down. Break that play task down. Because if we don't do that, when we get to junior high, when we get to high school, our students don't have leisure skills. They don't have hobbies, and that could be another reason that we have difficulties with those social interactions, because we never took it back down to the absolute foundation where play is so important. And so we love that structured play groups are now an evidence-based practice, because we know that's a core skill that we need to work and teach every single kiddo, especially when they are that young. And we talked earlier about the neuroplasticity of the brain and creating those connections. And so when we set the environment up, and there's lots of different ways we can do that. We can follow the child's lead. We can set it up where we're breaking into their world, and if they're spinning wheels on the ground, we're going to get down there and find out what it is that they're getting out of spinning the wheels. We're going to spin right with them. But then we're going to create some opportunities for some functional play, for some functional communication to go along with that. And so this is awesome that structured play groups have now been included.
And this also just goes back into teaching those rules, like teaching turn taking. And we use visuals for turn taking boards, and it's my turn, it's finished, now it's your turn, you're finished, now it's my turn, you're finished. And we make that very visual, very structured, but we're teaching that concept of how to play. And so we are very excited that structured play is now an evidence base.
And if you guys ever want more information, Google Stanley Greenspan. He's like 60 or 70 years old, and he'll be the first little grandpa guy to get down on the floor and play, and just to facilitate some of those social interactions. So that's a lot of where the structured play came from. Stanley Greenspan. Floor time is his packaged.
His packaged deal.
All these people who package all of these skills and fun things that we know are effective and make millions.
Package, this is the one that we told you we wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on, and this is exactly why. This is how they defined technology-aided instruction and intervention.
How much more broad could we really be? We know that it's effective for communication. We know that it can supplement curriculum. We know that it can help teach all of these different things. But I think there's a fine line about how we're going to use that technology, when we're going to introduce that technology. I don't recommend sticking an iPad in front of an 18-month-old unless we have already decided that it is going to be for a functional communication system. I think that if we're sticking technology in front of a kiddo at that age, we're probably losing some of that social back and forth people interaction skills that are so important. And I feel like it's really hard to break that once we've introduced that technology as a reinforcement system or for games. So I think it's, I'm a technology person. When I do my summer trainings, I am the technology girl who sits with the iPad, but I think there's lots of different ways that we can use technology.
And it's just so broad that, you know, I got nothing here.
Too much.
It's become an EBP, so we wanted to be sure that you all knew that. That terminology may be coming your way. But we wanted to, we're kind of been speeding because we definitely want to get to this last concept, which is time delay. And I cannot explain just how happy I am that time delay is finally an evidence-based practice in the literature. How many of you use or know that you are using time delay? Yes. Okay, see, this is why I get so excited. Time delay is absolutely awesome. Time delay is part of systematic instruction. So we've used it for years with kids with significant disabilities and kids with moderate to severe intellectual disabilities. Time delay has always been there. And what time delay is about is the systematic fading of prompts. So every time I say something like prompt fading, I told you guys with a typical, and we know there's no such thing, typical deaf population, what's the first prompt you give? That hand over hand or a verbal or a sign? What do you give in your classrooms?
Be honest.
Typical deaf kid, not complex learner. What do you do when you want them to do something? You sign to them or you say the direction. That works great for that population of students, right? What did you notice about the prompting that we used in PECS?
Think of the prompting hierarchy. Who's familiar with the different prompting hierarchies? Most to least. So what's the most? Hand over hand, full physical seems to be the most intrusive type of prompt.
We call that most, right? If you're doing a most to least, you start with hand.
So I am physically hand over hand directing her to do whatever it is that she's supposed to be doing.
We consider that most. If you look at that hierarchy, that little pyramid that we've all drawn out, right? What do you think is the easiest to fade?
And I think I already gave you the answer when we were talking about PECS.
Physical.
Why is the physical the easiest to fade? Well, when you think about it,
Fade me.
if I am first starting off doing a full physical, I am giving her the correct response. I'm not giving her time to doodle and do 5 other things, which we know our kiddos on the spectrum and with complex learning needs, if we give them that time, that's another step that we have taught them to do in that process. So if I go and I give her a full physical, she did the correct behavior that we wanted her to do. So then the next time or the next time.
Errorless learning.
Errorless learning at its best.
Yes.
So the next time I might just grab her wrist. Then I might support her elbow. Then maybe it's just my hand on her shoulder. And then maybe I'm just guiding. And then I'm going to a gesture as she's doing this. So I can very easily fade my physical touches. Right?
Absolutely.
Now look at the other type of prompting hierarchy, where
I don't know.
go. How do I
you
fade
fade
a
that?
verbal? What do I go to? Guh? I mean, my favorite story is using verbals to teach a boy to go into the restroom. And we would let our little guys go in and go potty, and about 10 minutes passed by, and we were all females, and it was a school that we couldn't just walk into the guy's bathroom. So We're like, what is going on in there? He's never taken this long. So we had a guy go in, and what do you think he was doing? He was standing in the stall
Waiting.
like this. Why was he standing in the stall?
He was waiting for his prompt.
He was waiting for his prompt, unbutton your pants. And so he had been verbally prompted through every step. A verbal does not equate independence. Anytime we want a skill to be independent, we want to go to that more intrusive, which is really the least intrusive, prompting level. Because we can so easily fade without saying a word, using our hands, using our physical touch. We can fade to a gesture, we can fade to a point. We can use proximity, our space. But when we start off using verbals, it's very hard to fade a verbal. And so a verbal actually results in a longer learning process. Because when we do that full physical, we're teaching them the skill. It's errorless learning.
Mm-hmm. So there are two different types of that. We're not going to go over those types today, but they're on your paperwork if you want to look those up later. You can either do time delay or you're fading of prompts through progressive time delay or constant time delay. And it's very systematic. At what point am I going to deliver that next prompt? Because our goal for prompts is to fade them, always. And I think so, I know you guys have prompt-dependent kids, right? I mean, it's...
And if you don't, we'll come bug you so we can see what magic wand you have.
You must have a magic wand. Prompt dependency is a reality in our worlds. And so we can think about our prompt schedule and our fading at the front end. Maybe we'll be able to see less and less of that. Very quickly, because it's already 2:15 and my son's school has already called that they're getting out of school early.
Snow must be coming.
Snow is coming down in Bloomington.
Person-centered planning. Are you guys familiar with person-centered planning? It's where we use a team approach to help facilitate the planning process for individuals with whatever disability or whatever's going on. It is a team process where we identify the values, the beliefs, what that student wants for his or her life. So it's a team approach. There's lots of different tools that are available to facilitate a person planning meeting. On the grant that I worked on for so many years, this is what we did with our families. We went in and we did a person-centered approach. We identified what it is the family wanted for their child, because oftentimes families are so stuck in the here and now. How can they get through the day? Let alone think about where do they see their kiddo in 15 or 30 years? What are their hopes and dreams? But what we find is if we start planning when they're young, if we say, hey, he loves drawing. We would love for him to be, involved in the computer world, graphic designing, computer illustrating. How can we get there? So what we do, there's a couple of different tools, maps and path. But at the core of both of these, it's taking a look at the student's strengths. It's taking a look at the goals or the nightmares, the barriers that the family and the team has. So this isn't just a process that is done in the school. It's not just a process that's done at home. It's with the full team. It's inviting people from the community in, inviting support systems. And the cool thing is you get like 15 or 20 people at this meeting. Some of them know the students. Some of them are just there because of their resources, but you really wrap the family. Are you guys all familiar with the wrap system? That's what person-centered planning is at its core. It's how can we identify and pull supports in from people who know people, from resources in the community, to build supports around this family. And so I think that is something else that is really, really important as we're planning for our students, because oftentimes we don't know what resources are out there, and it takes a process like this to do for each of our students. Back in our home districts in Bloomington and Unit 5, I work with a couple of teachers and we do a path or a maps process before each IEP. And so this gets everybody on board, and it's really cool because it's not just academic goals that are often targeted, it's some of those functional goals. It's some of those job-related skills. But this is in 4th grade, this is in 5th grade, where we're actually starting to plan, and it's very individualized. So these are the types of questions that are asked during a MAPS. What's the person's, and this is actually a really cool one, is what is the student's history? And if it's a student with ASD, oftentimes people at school have never heard what a struggle it was for that family to get that diagnosis. There is research out there that says that from the moment parents identified that there was something different with their child, how many years do you think it took them to get that diagnosis? Many, many, many years, anywhere from 3 to 7 years, depending on where their student fell on the spectrum. And so for 3 to 7 years, they knew something wasn't right. They didn't know what was right. And so that also explains a lot when we have families coming to us with distrust, because they had gone to their pediatrician, they had gone to their family doctor saying, all right, he's not talking. He's 3.5 years old and we don't have any words. A referral wasn't made. They go back when the student's 4. Still no progress. Oh, we're just gonna wait. He's a boy. He's his older siblings. And hopefully it's not that bad anymore. I know that we're getting better at providing services early because we know how important early intervention is. But just hearing the family's history of all of the different strategies they've tried, all of the different doctors they've seen, it gives you a whole new understanding of what that family has gone through. It also helps you identify what strategies the family has used in the past. So you can identify and you can see where they are and what they've done. But it gives you a really good idea of what that student's family life is like and who that student is. So it's a really good information gathering system. I always like blending these two models. And then a PATH stands for Planning Alternative Tomorrows with Hope. And it does essentially the same thing, but it starts off with the goal. It starts off with the dream. Where do you see that student in 15 years? And then it breaks it down to, all right, what are the 12-month goals? So we want him to be independent living. What can we do in the next year that will help facilitate that? What are the goals that we can write to get to that spot?
Yeah.
And the cool thing is we meet every 6 months to rewrite those goals because we're breaking them down into very achievable components. And it's getting more people on board. Say they have a hobby and somebody knows somebody that has a swimming class and somebody knows somebody that can drive them. So it's a great way to make connections and put supports in place for our students. Great tools. I can do full day trainings on person-centered planning, but in the end, it's a great team approach. It's fun.
I know that was a lot of information, and I know you're tired of sitting. But our day is almost coming to an end, and so we're going to conclude and field some questions, if that works for you all. Complexity is an understatement.
We know it, you guys see it.
You're living it every day. We know that. There are many, many strategies to choose from. And we felt like our job today was just to let you know about a few more of those strategies that are out there.
Hopefully you can add them to your toolbox and
print off those fact sheets, those data sheets. If you see a couple that you feel like may help with some of these really difficult behaviors that you have on these sheets around this room. And today we were so busy we didn't even get to go back to those. Maybe next February, who knows? But there is so much to choose from. And don't give up too fast or too slow.
Christi had her soapbox a little bit ago about saliency.
The same person.
The data is mine. Too often I feel like I go into classrooms and I hear people say, well, we tried this. And I'm very happy that they're trying new things, but because it didn't work in the first 3 weeks, they often push it off to the side and they think that it's not going to be effective. We know that for a typical student with autism, do you know how long it takes something to get into their working memory? How many trials? 72 trials to get into their working memory. And so we have to repeat that and repeat that. Repetition is so important. And so that's why it's really important that we keep our data, that we use our data, and that we don't, after a week or 2 weeks of trying something new, that we throw it out the window because we didn't think it was effective.
And that whole number 72, That means whenever I talk with a teacher, I said, well, have you done it at least 100 times? Because 72 is not magic, right? But neither is 40. And you really have to look at how many opportunities did your student have to engage in this skill during a school day. There are some skills, let's just face it, that it's going to take the entire year to get 72 trials.
But not only that, if it's a behavior that they're using and they're using and they're using, to unlearn a behavior,
Really hard.
it could take 250 trials. So I mean, there's lots of different things that we need to make sure that we're doing, and we're not just hopping from strategy to strategy because something doesn't work. We need to be patient, we need to take a look at, and maybe that doesn't mean that what we put in place isn't going to work. It means maybe we take a look at it and we have to tweak it just a little bit. My favorite word is restructure. Restructure, restructure, restructure. Don't completely abandon what you're doing. Take a look at it and see how we can bump up that support so it's going to make a student successful.
And you all are here because you have already connected with ISRC, which is always my recommendation to every teacher that I get phone calls from around the country. I say ISRC is the best. Check out their website, look for this stuff. You all have resources put in place for you. You are fortunate to be teachers in the state of Illinois, where we have the strongest organization for teachers of the deaf nationwide. There's no doubt about it. And
Can't
so
say the same about autism.
use each other, use ISRC. I generally give my information at the end of these things, but we don't feel a need to do that today because you have ISRC that you can contact with any questions on these, and they can always get a hold of us. I think we're on speed dial with one another, but we love to talk about these puzzles, and you're all going to do wonderful. Thank you for your attention today. We don't want to hold you late, and we don't want to end on the side of a road again.
No.
But thank you.